The night my father was named Man of the Year, I walked into the church fellowship hall with a folder under my arm and a recording hidden on my phone. Everyone else came to applaud him. I came to tell the truth. My father, Nathan Whitmore, was the kind of man a small town trusted without asking questions. He was a deacon at Grace Baptist, the owner of Whitmore Construction, a youth baseball coach, a donor, a committee member, and the smiling husband in every church newsletter photo. People knew the white colonial house on Maple Ridge Lane. They knew the trimmed lawn, the brass porch lights, the porch swing my mother decorated every fall, and the family Christmas cards where we looked clean, grateful, and safe. But nobody knew what happened after the front door closed. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 25 years old. I am a nurse. And for 18 years, I believed that pain was something I caused by not being obedient enough. My father never looked like a monster. That was the first thing people misunderstood. He did not yell in public. He did not drink too much. He did not stumble through the house, leaving chaos behind him. He was calm, polished, careful, and respected. His anger was not wild. It was organized. When I was 10, I came home with a B on a spelling quiz. My mother, Elaine, was stirring soup at the stove. My father sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper folded beside his plate. He asked what happened. I said I made a mistake. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the kitchen door, and closed it. I do not need to describe every second. What matters is what happened afterward. My mother pressed a bag of frozen peas against my side and whispered, "You know how to push his buttons?" That sentence became the wallpaper of my childhood. You know how to push his buttons. When he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. You know how to push his buttons. When I flinched at the sound of his truck in the driveway. You know how to push his buttons. When doctors asked questions, my mother answered before I could open my mouth. The first emergency room visit happened when I was 12. My mother told the nurse I had fallen down the basement stairs. My father stood outside the curtain, speaking softly to someone from the church on his phone. I remember his voice more than the pain because he sounded so kind. The nurse looked at the bruise under my ribs and then at my face. She asked, "Do you feel safe at home?" My mother's hand tightened on my shoulder. I said yes. I hated myself for that, for years. Now I know children do not lie because they enjoy lying. Children lie because the truth has nowhere safe to land. There were 5 emergency visits before I turned 17. 5 stories, 5 accidents, 5 notes buried in medical files where doctors wrote words like inconsistent, concerning, follow-up recommended. But my father knew people. He built the church fellowship hall at cost. He donated to the youth center. He coached the sons of police officers, board members, and town planners. In Willow Creek, reputation could wrap itself around a lie and make it look holy. My mother was not loud in her betrayal. That made it harder to name. She did not laugh when I cried. She did not say my father was right to hurt me. She cleaned the kitchen afterward. She washed the towels. She placed concealer in my school bag. She told me which long sleeves to wear. Then she said, "Try not to upset him today." For years, I thought that was love. I thought love was damage control. I thought a mother's job was to keep the house quiet, even if quiet meant teaching her daughter to disappear. Pastor Lyle used to say every family carried private burdens. My father used to nod along from the front pew. My mother would smile with her Bible open on her lap. I would sit between them and wonder if God could hear the parts of me nobody else wanted to hear. Silence was called loyalty in our house. Leaving was called betrayal. Telling the truth was called destroying the family. When I was 16, I got a job at Palmer's Pharmacy. I told my father it was for responsibility. The truth was that I needed money he could not control. My first paycheck was $148. I hid it in a paperback book under my mattress. 3 days later, it was gone. At dinner, my father did not look up from his plate when he said, "Money earned under this roof belongs to this household." That night, my grandmother Ruth called. Grandma Ruth was my mother's mother, and she was the only person who looked at our perfect house and saw smoke, even when nobody else smelled fire. I cried into the phone and told her he had taken my paycheck. She listened until I ran out of breath. Then she said, "Never let a bully hold the checkbook." A week later, she brought me a small blue lockbox. It was ugly, dented, and perfect. I hid it inside an empty tampon box in the back of my closet because my father respected nothing about me except the things he refused to look at. By 17, I had a library card, a secret email account, and a P.O. box 2 towns over. I applied to nursing programs from public computers. I filled out financial aid forms between shifts at the pharmacy. I wrote scholarship essays after midnight while my father slept upstairs and my mother pretended she did not hear me moving around. I did not choose nursing because I loved hospitals. I chose nursing because I remembered the nurses who almost knew. I remembered how their eyes paused on my face. I remembered the way they asked questions gently, as if the right answer might break if they touched it too hard. I wanted to become the person who could recognize silence. I left at 18 with 2 bags, 1 folder of school papers, and $582 hidden in my shoe. My mother cried on the porch. My father stood behind her with his arms folded. He said, "You will come back when the world teaches you gratitude." I almost did, more than once. Freedom is terrifying when control is the only structure you have ever known. Nursing school saved me slowly. It did not heal me all at once. It gave me language first, patterns, documentation, mechanism of injury, coercive control, financial abuse, mandatory reporting, safety planning. Words matter. When you have spent your life surrounded by people who renamed cruelty as discipline. I worked nights. I studied until my eyes burned. I memorized medication doses on buses. I learned the names of bones and the 1,000 ways a body can tell the truth after a mouth has been trained to lie. I became good at my job. Too good. Some people said, too calm in emergencies, too careful with records, too quick to notice when a patient's explanation sounded rehearsed. They did not know that I had been trained in a house where survival depended on details. For a while, I thought my story had ended. I had an apartment, a paycheck, and a door I could lock from the inside. Then my brother Caleb called me from the bathroom with the shower running. He was 18 by then, quiet, gentle, and brilliant with machines. He loved taking apart old radios and broken lawnmowers just to prove something ruined could still work again. My father called him soft, then lazy, then disrespectful. When Caleb whispered my name into the phone, I knew before he said it. His voice was flat, not crying, flat. That frightened me more. "Nora," he said, "how did you make him stop?" I sat down on my kitchen floor because my legs stopped working. I wanted to tell him I had made it stop. I wanted to be the older sister with a clean answer. Instead, I said, I left. The line stayed quiet. Then he said, "I don't know if I can." That was the moment my pain became something sharper, not revenge, responsibility. I began documenting everything. Every call, every text, every time Caleb told me Dad had taken his phone, every time Mom told him to keep his head down until college, every time my father threatened the college fund if Caleb embarrassed the family. $38,000. That was how much was supposed to be in Caleb's education account. Birthday gifts, summer jobs. A small account Grandma Ruth had started years earlier. My father controlled it. Of course he did. In our family, money was never just money. It was a leash. Then the church announced the award. Nathan Whitmore would be honored at the annual community banquet as Man of the Year for leadership, generosity, and moral example. I read the email 3 times. Then I laughed so hard I almost threw up. Moral example, the man who taught me to lie about bruises, the man who stole my wages, the man who made my mother apologize for the sound of my crying. Caleb was expected to stand on stage beside him. The perfect son, the obedient son, the final proof that Nathan Whitmore had built a righteous household. 2 nights before the banquet, Caleb called again. He said if I don't go, the college money is gone. I asked, "Where's Mom?" "In the kitchen." "Does she know?" "She said not to make this harder." Not to make this harder. Another sentence from the family dictionary. It meant carry the pain quietly so everyone else can keep pretending. I asked Caleb a question no one had asked me when I was his age. "Do you want out?" He said, "Yes." So I called Grandma Ruth. She answered on the second ring. I said, "It's happening to Caleb now." She was silent for one breath. Then she said, "Then we stop it now." Grandma Ruth had kept things. I did not know how much. Old hospital discharge papers, a copy of a child protective follow-up letter from when I was 14, a doctor's note requesting further assessment, a school counselor's card with a date written on the back. She spread them across her kitchen table like pieces of my childhood returned from the grave. "I kept them because one day I thought you might need proof that you were not crazy," she said. I cried when she said that, not loudly, just one hand over my mouth while the refrigerator hummed behind us. You can live for years believing nobody saw you. Then one sentence can show you someone was keeping a candle in the window the whole time. The recording happened the next afternoon. Ohio allowed one-party consent, and Caleb was 18. I explained it carefully. He could legally record a conversation he was part of. I told him not to provoke, not to trap. Just stay safe and let the truth sound like itself. The recording lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds. My father's voice was exactly as I remembered it. Low, controlled, more frightening than shouting. "You will stand on that stage," he said, "and you will act grateful." Caleb said, "I don't want to lie." Then came the sound of a chair scraping. My mother saying, "Nathan, please." My father saying, Stay out of it. Elaine. Then the threats. The college fund, the roof over his head, the family name. Finally, Caleb's voice cracked. Why do you always make love sound like debt? I played that sentence 6 times. Every time, something in me broke open and rearranged. Love sounded like debt in our house because my father was not building a family. He was running a kingdom. And kingdoms do not end because the king becomes kind. They end when the people inside stop kneeling. The evening of the banquet, I wore a navy dress and pinned my nurse badge inside my coat pocket. I do not know why. Maybe I needed to remember who I had become. Not the girl in the hallway, not the child apologizing for bruises. A licensed nurse, a woman trained to document, a woman who knew a clean record could outlive a dirty reputation. Grandma Ruth met me in the parking lot wearing a purple coat and holding a manila envelope against her chest. Ready? She asked. No. Good, she said. Only fools are ready for things like this. Inside, the fellowship hall glowed with rented lights, white tablecloths, blue napkins, a banner that read, "Honoring Integrity." They had printed the word 12 feet wide over a room full of people who had mistaken reputation for character. My father stood near the stage in a gray suit, accepting congratulations like blessings. My mother stood beside him in a cream dress, smiling with tired eyes. Caleb stood near the back wall, pale and stiff, hands folded like he was trying not to shake apart. When he saw me, his face changed. Scared, relieved, then scared again. My father saw me too. His smile did not move, but his eyes hardened. "Nora," he said, "I didn't know you were coming." "I know," I said. Dinner passed like a bad dream. Chicken, green beans, rolls that tasted like cardboard. People gave speeches about my father's generosity. They talked about houses he built, boys he coached, families he helped. Every compliment landed on me like another door closing. Then Pastor Lyle called him to the stage. My father walked up slowly, humbly, perfectly. He accepted the plaque with both hands. He thanked God. He thanked the church. He thanked my mother for keeping the home peaceful. My mother lowered her eyes. I saw her hands tremble. Then my father looked toward Caleb. "My son," he said, "has learned the importance of obedience, discipline, and honoring his father." Caleb looked like he might disappear. I stood. At first, only the people at my table noticed. Then the chair legs scraped. Then the room shifted. Pastor Lyle blinked. "Nora?" I walked toward the microphone. My heart pounded so hard I could hear blood in my ears. My father said softly, "Sit down." Same voice, same command, same old door. This time, I kept walking. At the microphone, I opened the folder. My hands shook, so I placed the papers on the podium before anyone could see. I said, "Before this church honors my father as a moral example, it should know what his home has required from his children." The first sound was confusion, then discomfort. My father laughed once, a small, polished laugh. "Nora has always been emotional," he said. There it was. The old weapon, make the truth sound unstable before it can stand up straight. I lifted the first document. This is an emergency room record from when I was 12. It notes bruising inconsistent with a fall. This is another from 14. This is another from 15. 5 emergency visits. 5 stories about clumsiness. 5 times someone almost asked the right question. The room went still. My father's face changed, not with guilt, but with calculation. Then my mother stood. For one breath, I thought she was going to defend him. Instead, she said, barely above a whisper, I said she pushed his buttons. Every head turned toward her. She looked at me. I said it for years. Her voice broke. I was wrong. I almost collapsed. Not because an apology fixes 18 years. It does not. But because the person who taught me to blame myself had finally said the blame belonged somewhere else. Grandma Ruth stood next. Her voice was old but sharp. I kept copies, she said, because I knew one day somebody would need to prove what this town refused to see. My father stepped toward the microphone. Pastor Lyle moved between us. That was the first time I saw the room stop protecting him. Then I played the recording. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. My father's calm voice filled the fellowship hall. You will stand on that stage. You will act grateful. The college money is mine to control. Everything earned under this roof belongs to this household. Nobody coughed. Nobody moved a chair. Nobody reached for coffee. Then Caleb's voice came through the speaker. Why do you always make love sound like debt? My brother stood. He looked terrified, but he stood. He said, My sister is telling the truth. That was the sound of the kingdom falling. Not thunder, not shouting. One boy deciding he would not kneel anymore. My father did not receive the plaque that night. Within 72 hours, the deacon board removed him. 2 construction contracts disappeared. Then a third. A town planner who had once played golf with him stopped returning his calls. A temporary protection order was filed. My father left the Maple Ridge house with 2 suitcases and a face like the world had betrayed him. That is how abusers speak when consequences arrive. They call it betrayal. They never call it accounting. The college fund was gone. All $38,000. Moved, spent, hidden badly. Caleb found out 2 days after the banquet. He sat at my kitchen table and did not cry. That frightened me again. Then Grandma Ruth opened her purse and placed a check in front of him. $8,400. It is not enough, she said, but it is a door. Caleb finally cried then. So did I. He started community college that fall in mechanical engineering. He still fixes broken things. Only now he knows he is not one of them. My mother did not become brave overnight. Real life is not that clean. She started therapy. She got her driver's license at 50. She opened a bank account in her own name. One day she called and said, I keep hearing myself say that sentence to you. You know how to push his buttons. I said, I hear it too. She cried. I did not comfort her the way I used to. Healing does not mean returning to old roles. As for my father, he still sends messages sometimes. Not apologies, statements. How could you do this to me? After everything I provided, this family is ruined because of you. I save them, not because I plan to use them, because proof helped me leave the first prison, and I will never again let confusion build a second one. I am still a nurse. I still notice bruise patterns. I still ask quiet patients if they feel safe at home. Sometimes they say yes too quickly. Sometimes they look at the person beside them before answering. Sometimes they smile like I used to smile in family photos. When that happens, I slow down, I make space, I leave information where it can be found. I do not force anyone to run before they have shoes. But I want them to know there is a door. There is always a door. It may be hidden behind fear, money, shame, religion, reputation, or a mother who says you caused the pain. But it exists. For 18 years, I thought loyalty meant silence. I thought leaving was betrayal. I thought a perfect family portrait proved I was the broken piece. I was wrong. Silence is not loyalty. Leaving is not betrayal. And the truth does not become cruel just because it embarrasses someone who was protected by lies. The night my father was named Man of the Year, I walked into church with a folder and a recording. I walked out without the family image that had trapped me. And for the first time in my life, the house on Maple Ridge Lane looked small from the outside. There is one detail I did not understand until much later. My father did not need everyone to believe he was perfect. He only needed them to prefer the perfect story over the painful one. That is why the White House mattered. That is why the lawn mattered. That is why my mother's pearls mattered. And the church photos, and the baseball trophies, and the handshake after service. Every symbol became a lock. Every compliment became insulation. Every person who said, "Nathan is such a good man," became one more reason a frightened child thought nobody would believe her. The truth did not only set me free, it made me angry at how much decoration had been required to keep us trapped. I used to think courage would feel like confidence. It did not. Courage felt like nausea. It felt like sweat under my collar. It felt like my knees shaking behind a podium while my father looked at me with the eyes he used to make me small. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was walking while afraid because Caleb was watching. And when he stood up after the recording, when he said I was telling the truth, I understood that one person's voice can become a staircase for another person to climb out. There is one detail I did not understand until much later. My father did not need everyone to believe he was perfect. He only needed them to prefer the perfect story over the painful one. That is why the White House mattered. That is why the lawn mattered. That is why my mother's pearls mattered. And the church photos, and the baseball trophies, and the handshake after service. Every symbol became a lock. Every compliment became insulation. Every person who said, "Nathan is such a good man," became one more reason a frightened child thought nobody would believe her. The truth did not only set me free, it made me angry at how much decoration had been required to keep us trapped. I used to think courage would feel like confidence. It did not. Courage felt like nausea. It felt like sweat under my collar. It felt like my knees shaking behind a podium while my father looked at me with the eyes he used to make me small. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was walking while afraid because Caleb was watching. And when he stood up after the recording, when he said I was telling the truth, I understood that one person's voice can become a staircase for another person to climb out. There is one detail I did not understand until much later. My father did not need everyone to believe he was perfect. He only needed them to prefer the perfect story over the painful one. That is why the White House mattered. That is why the lawn mattered. That is why my mother's pearls mattered. And the church photos, and the baseball trophies, and the handshake after service. Every symbol became a lock. Every compliment became insulation. Every person who said, "Nathan is such a good man," became one more reason a frightened child thought nobody would believe her. The truth did not only set me free, it made me angry at how much decoration had been required to keep us trapped. I used to think courage would feel like confidence. It did not. Courage felt like nausea. It felt like sweat under my collar. It felt like my knees shaking behind a podium while my father looked at me with the eyes he used to make me small. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was walking while afraid because Caleb was watching. And when he stood up after the recording, when he said I was telling the truth, I understood that one person's voice can become a staircase for another person to climb out. There is one detail I did not understand until much later. My father did not need everyone to believe he was perfect. He only needed them to prefer the perfect story over the painful one. That is why the White House mattered. That is why the lawn mattered. That is why my mother's pearls mattered. And the church photos, and the baseball trophies, and the handshake after service. Every symbol became a lock. Every compliment became insulation. Every person who said, "Nathan is such a good man," became one more reason a frightened child thought nobody would believe her. The truth did not only set me free, it made me angry at how much decoration had been required to keep us trapped. I used to think courage would feel like confidence. It did not. Courage felt like nausea. It felt like sweat under my collar. It felt like my knees shaking behind a podium while my father looked at me with the eyes he used to make me small. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was walking while afraid because Caleb was watching. And when he stood up after the recording, when he said I was telling the truth, I understood that one person's voice can become a staircase for another person to climb out. There is one detail I did not understand until much later. My father did not need everyone to believe he was perfect. He only needed them to prefer the perfect story over the painful one. That is why the White House mattered. That is why the lawn mattered. That is why my mother's pearls mattered. And the church photos, and the baseball trophies, and the handshake after service. Every symbol became a lock. Every compliment became insulation. Every person who said, "Nathan is such a good man," became one more reason a frightened child thought nobody would believe her. The truth did not only set me free, it made me angry at how much decoration had been required to keep us trapped. I used to think courage would feel like confidence. It did not. Courage felt like nausea. It felt like sweat under my collar. It felt like my knees shaking behind a podium while my father looked at me with the eyes he used to make me small. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was walking while afraid because Caleb was watching. And when he stood up after the recording, when he said I was telling the truth, I understood that one person's voice can become a staircase for another person to climb out. There is one detail I did not understand until much later. My father did not need everyone to believe he was perfect. He only needed them to prefer the perfect story over the painful one. That is why the White House mattered. That is why the lawn mattered. That is why my mother's pearls mattered. And the church photos, and the baseball trophies, and the handshake after service. Every symbol became a lock. Every compliment became insulation. Every person who said, "Nathan is such a good man," became one more reason a frightened child thought nobody would believe her. The truth did not only set me free, it made me angry at how much decoration had been required to keep us trapped. I used to think courage would feel like confidence. It did not. Courage felt like nausea. It felt like sweat under my collar. It felt like my knees shaking behind a podium while my father looked at me with the eyes he used to make me small. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was walking while afraid because Caleb was watching. And when he stood up after the recording, when he said I was telling the truth, I understood that one person's voice can become a staircase for another person to climb out